Let's talk top tips for interview. Hi, my name's Laura. I'm a career consultant and to date I have helped hundreds of people succeed in their interviews. So let's get started. Tip number one is put yourself in the interviewer's seat. And this isn't even really the tip, this is going to be the theme that goes throughout the whole video, okay? Because it is the most important part. Put yourself in the interviewer's seat, okay? And sounds easy. Or what do I mean by that? Okay, so it's natural to go, when you go for an interview, to be like, okay, I need to get across this about me and this about me and this about me, and I'm chewing at the bit, ready to go talk about myself, talk about all my strengths, my skills, my experience. And yes, that is all very important, but first of all, you need to think, well, what is important to them? What are they looking for? Okay, again, if I put myself in the interviewer's seat, I, as the interviewer, have an open role, okay? And how do I know that this person sitting in front of me is going to be able to fill this role? Well, I know for somebody to be successful in this role, they need to have certain competencies. It could be communication skills, it could be leadership skills, it could be delivery, it could be attention to detail. Usually these competencies are either highlighted in the original job description or will be sent to you in the details calling you for interview. If not, AI is your friend and you need to watch one of my other videos on that. Okay, so again, I'm in the interviewer's seat. I, as the interviewer, know that I need these certain competencies from a person to be successful in the role. So you, as the interviewee, need to be focusing on those specific competencies and how you bring value based on those competencies, okay? An interview is not an opportunity for you to talk about your experience and your strengths. It's about telling the interviewer what they want to hear. So what you want to do before you start any form of preparation is, I'm going to refer to those strengths, those competencies, those skills as themes. So you want to identify these core themes that the interviewer is looking for from the right candidate for this role. And you want to break them down and figure out what those themes are. And then we're going to be talking about how you relate them back to your experience. Okay, so my next top tip is about preparing for the why you question. 90% of the time when you go for interview, the first question they're going to ask is, tell me a bit about yourself, talk me through your experience to date, give me an overview of your CV or your resume, depending on where you're from. Really, what are they asking? They're asking why you. And actually, even regardless of whether they ask it or not, it's just a really good starting point when it comes to preparing for your interview, because it gets you thinking, it gets you brainstorming about how your experience is relevant to those themes. Again, remember, we want to put ourselves in the interviewer's seat. They are focused on these core themes. You want to tell them how your experience and how you are bringing value based on those core themes. So the why you question and the answer to the why you question is really your elevator pitch, okay? So a quick synopsis overview of your education and your experience to date, but you really want to relay it back to those themes again. So, open up, talk a little bit about how you got into this area, maybe a bit about your education. Then you're going to work chronologically through your experience to date, depending on how much experience you have. So for example, I've worked with people who have been in an industry for, say, up to 20 years. They might have worked in 10 different roles. So, you're not going to spend the whole time going in depth in every single role. Maybe you're just giving a sentence of overview of your historical experience and how, again, that relates back to the themes. But you want to talk the most about either your most recent role or the one that is most relevant, again, to this job you are applying for and to the themes. If you're somebody who is either a recent graduate or who is, has a lot less experience, maybe only 2 to 3 years, again, you're going to talk about your most recent experience in a bit more detail, but still focusing on how it relates back to the themes. And, if you are a graduate and you don't have a huge amount of relevant on the job experience based on the role you're applying for, you can still relay it back If you're involved in sports and that's, core around teamwork and that collaboration, all of those areas, if you obviously did an undergrad degree and you had deadlines for your thesis, you can talk all about that side if it's relevant to the role. Another top tip I would have underneath this area would be about trying to give quantifiable examples where possible. So, if you're in more of a sales driven role, that's a bit easier by being able to say things like, I over exceeded on targets by X percentage. If it's more project management, I delivered within this timeline. I arranged or managed a cost saving of X, Y, and Z, or, other areas I've optimized on processes, which resulted in an overall time saving or cost saving of Y. Okay, so all of those, if you can bring in any kind of quantifiable example in your why you were, or throughout any of your answers, it's really strong. Okay, it's just easier, again, putting yourself in the interviewer's seat. Things like numbers, that type of quantifiable thing, it sticks out more. It's easier to understand. That's human nature. If you're in a profession that's maybe, more medical based, or in an area that's not really like that, it's not target driven, it's not something that you can say, okay, with X amount or this, it's not relevant to your role, then it is just, what is the outcome is going to be a very important piece throughout this as well. And, what's the most important thing for patient safety and, patient satisfaction is going to be key across the board here. And my top tip number 3 is all about your experience. So with your answers throughout the interview, you want to keep in mind, you want to be focusing on how to relay your experience. And this does link in with the STAR method. I'm sure if you're doing any kind of research on preparing for interview, you're familiar with the STAR method being situation, task, action, result. And my clients often ask me about that, and it's a really good framework for structuring your answers, but I'd hate the idea of anyone ever sitting in an interview and getting muddled up by thinking, okay, what was the situation, what was the task, action, result. So if you think about, if something happens in work and you go home and you're talking to a friend or family member, you are naturally going to say, this is what happened, this is what I did, this was the outcome. Okay, it's storytelling, and that's really what you're doing here. You want to keep in mind that you're telling them a story about your experience. This is key. So again, and I know you're sick of hearing me say that, but if I'm putting myself in the interviewer's seat, how can I understand that this person is strong on these teams, is competent in these teams that we have identified? Okay, I know that if they can talk to me about their experience in that area, if they tell me a story of how they demonstrated is such an important word here. So how they demonstrated these core competencies or these teams. I'll give the example, and this kind of links into my next top tip as well. But if I'm an interviewer and I ask a question, give me an example of a time where you demonstrated leadership skills. Okay, and I have candidate A who gives me an answer and talks all about, the research they have done around the importance of core leadership skills, talks about different types of leadership styles, uses all the right buzzwords, so to speak. But that's the whole of their answer. And then I have candidate B who might be a little less articulate, might not have as many buzzwords, but they're able to talk me through, to tell me their story of how they led a team on a specific project in the past, and they talk me all through what they did and gave me the outcome being the most important part, the result. Then I, as the interviewer, really get a sense of their leadership skills. So candidate A, who gave me that all the information around the research and everything else, has proven that they can regurgitate information. Great. They can be articulate. That is a really important skill, absolutely. They can use the right buzzwords, and that can be obviously helpful and important in areas, but not unless they're able to demonstrate how they have proven in the past that they have these competencies in these areas. So that's why the storytelling piece, the giving your examples of your experience, is so much more important than any type of buzzword. Which really lends into my top tip number 4, as I said, which is don't worry about buzzwords. They are the icing on the cake. If you can bring them in, brilliant. If not, it's not the end of the world. And the reason I'm putting this in as a top tip is because so many of my clients come to me with that. Like, that's the first thing they come for an interview preparation session, and they're like, I really need help preparing for interview. I don't feel like I have the right buzzwords. Buzzwords are at the very bottom of the list. Yes, again, it's the icing on the cake. It's great if you can bring them in, but it's secondary to being able to tell your story. Okay, the storytelling piece is far more important. Okay, my top tip number 5 is ask credible questions. So a lot of the time you're going to be nervous going into interview. That's only natural. You will have put a lot of time and effort and preparation into it. So when it gets to the end of the interview and the interviewer says, that's great, thank you, have you any questions for us? It's somewhat natural to feel like, no, phew, get me out of here. Okay, but again, if I put myself in the interviewer's seat, I know you're sick of hearing me say it, even if the candidate has done a really good interview, and they're kind of like, phew, get me out of here, it's a bit like, whereas if they're asking credible questions, it shows me that they have an interest in the role itself. Okay, so I'm going to put a list of credible questions you can ask below, but here are a couple offhand. If you feel the interview went well, but you would like to give more, a good question to ask is there anything I haven't covered that you would like me to now? I feel this is a good question because often interviews are really a tick boxing or a scoring exercise. So as the interviewer, if I feel this candidate overall has given a really good interview, but I feel like I haven't been able to weigh them highly enough in certain scores on certain areas, then it gives me the opportunity to kind of probe a bit more, maybe get a bit more from them to push that up. Other good questions are, what are the main challenges that face the company or the industry at the moment? Now, a top tip on this particular question is, if you are going to ask it, you want to be prepared for them to flip it on you. So you want to be prepared for them to say, well, what do you think? And then that is an opportunity to impress if you're able to talk a little bit about what the challenges that the current organisation or industry are facing. It shows you're knowledgeable and you've done your research. So yeah, there are a couple of questions, and as I said, I'll list more below. Thanks so much for listening. Please like and subscribe.